Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Bismillah wa salatu wa salam ala rasulillah wa ala alihi wa ashabihi wa man walah wa ba'd. So I want to connect what I'm saying with something that I heard Shaykh Shafi speak about, which is the quotation from Shaykh Abdul Fattah Abu Ghudda about the beautiful characteristics and mannerisms of Islam, and how a person has to be warned about really about discriminating in his or her application of these things in their lives, and in this case discriminating against those who are close to themselves. That particular idea can be broadened a little bit, and I think it needs to be broadened in terms of how we discriminate the overall teachings against the overall teachings of Islam by picking certain aspects of the teachings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and then discarding others. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So to resume, I was talking about how we discriminate against the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and choose to implement some of them and refuse to implement others and discard others completely. And I've been wondering what might be the best way to articulate the varying manifestations of that. And I heard in a speech by a friend recently him citing the great Indian scholar and thinker Shaykh Ashraf Ali Thanwi, where he says that people's submission to their deen, to the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is done in four ways. And he says, so therefore as Muslims, as people who submit to Islam, we fall into four categories. So he says the first category is the mizaji Muslim. And the mizaji Muslim is the Muslim who simply applies the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala when the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the teachings of Islam are consistent with his own character, with his own personality. So if something is consistent with his personality, this works for me because yes, justice is good because I feel I'm a just person, so yes, justice is okay. But this other aspect of Islam, worship, ritualistic, well, I'm a rational person, all this ritual stuff doesn't make sense to me, so I'm not gonna accept that. So one conforms to my personality, the other doesn't. So I pick this one and abandon the other. So I'm he calls it a mizaji Muslim. I am a Muslim who picks and chooses based on my mizaj, based on my own disposition and my own personality. And then the second category is what he calls riwaji Muslims. And riwaji Muslims are Muslims who basically pick and choose which aspect of Islam they practice and which aspect of Islam they abandon based on culture. So when a particular aspect of Islam conforms to the culture that they have been brought up in, yes, this is good. It's like it has my endorsement, or it has the endorsement of my culture. But when a particular aspect of Islam doesn't quite conform to culture, or in fact contradicts culture, then culture comes first. Oh well, since when did Islam have anything against culture? Culture is good, so we're going to go along with culture. And all of a sudden there is this deliberate attempt to be blind to whatever Islam has to say against that particular aspect of culture. And now sometimes culture then becomes so powerful that it even obscures and blinds us to even our own perception of justice, our own perception of fairness, our own perception of what is good and bad. Culture becomes this overarching power that really subdues our judgment completely. And then he talks about the Shar'i Muslim. And the Shar'i Muslim is the one that follows the black and white of text. So it's like, this is halal, I stick to it. This is haram, I refrain from it. And he kind of lives his life as a legal Muslim. Another contemporary scholar, Shaykh Salman Nadwi, this is Dr. Salman Nadwi of South Africa and America, not Shaykh Salman al-Husseini al-Nadwi. He once said quite nicely, this is a nice soundbite, where he said that nowadays Muslims tend to be legal Muslims. I mean, we live our lives and our subscription to Islam and our obedience to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it is almost a preparation for some kind of courtroom battle. right? So that's the Shar'i Muslim. Everything is about text. And when something, and if there's any gray, and there's a lot of it, there's much of Islam that is about the application of universal values, the application of things that are just broadly understood to be good, and things that are generally understood to be bad. The idea of al-ma'ruf and the idea of al-munkar. One of the things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes this ummah as being uniquely upholding as one of our, if you like, if I'm to use the word, it's like this is our qawmi character. This is like the character of the ummah. It is the fact that we uphold al-amru bil ma'ruf wa nahi anil munkar, that we enjoin good and forbid evil. In English, it sounds, just good and evil, right? There is an element of subjectivity to the idea of good and the idea of evil. But in Arabic, it's just ma'ruf and munkar. And ma'ruf is what is generally understood to be good, and munkar is what is generally understood to be evil. And finally, there is the haqiqi Muslim, the true Muslim. And the true Muslim brings all of the various aspects of Islam together and tries to create a balance and submits completely to the whole of the message. So those words, inshallah, as an introduction. And shall I conclude for salah? Yeah, I think I should. So I think everybody needs to go away and think about that as you pray, and then I'll come back and address the specific issue of abuse in the family dynamic, inshallah. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum. So now, I don't want to talk much about abuse between husband and wife, because I believe Imam Abdullah Hassan is going to speak about it. I want to talk about the responsibility of the wider family, and not just the responsibility, but we need to understand how it is that they contribute to abuse. Now, most of us come from a background where we live together as large extended families, and sometimes extended family, and in fact culturally we might not even think it's extended family, but it is extended family. These extended families live together, and by that I mean mom, dad, you have 2 or 3 sons, and then the sons often, particularly in places like Thai Hamlets, live, when they get married, they live with their wives under the roofs of their parents. This is very, very normal in South Asian subcontinental culture. And here you end up with the extended family contributing to emotional, psychological, and sometimes, and I hope I don't have to address this, but it does happen, sometimes physical abuse, just because of the nature of that particular construct. Now, some of us are here, and we would like to know what the situation, we're probably here to take away some sound bites with regards to Islam's position on a husband's abuse of the wife, and also it has to be acknowledged vice versa. But actually, when it comes to abuse, sister-in-laws play a part, mother-in-laws play a part, father-in-laws play a part, brother-in-laws play a part, and this is the immediate members of the extended family. This also transgresses to what we call other-in-law. So you have a daughter-in-law, she has her mother-in-law, but then if her mother-in-law has sisters, they're also mother-in-laws, right? So she has her husband's older sister is a mother-in-law, right? And in Bengali, if you know the terms, they all have hoaries next to them. All of them have the word hoaries next to them, right? So you have moihori, you have nonhori, etc. So they're all there's an acknowledgement, but they're also hoaries. So and funny enough, that acknowledgement often results in the kind of treatment that you can expect from a mother-in-law. A daughter-in-law can expect some of that treatment, especially if it is abuse. Some of that treatment also happens from the moihori, which is the mother-in-law's sister or sisters. Gosh, if you've got a mother-in-law who's got 4 or 5 sisters, Allah help you. All right, and then you have the non-hoaries, right? So you have the husband's older sisters. They behave like mother-in-laws, and the mother-in-law problem is a universal issue, right? Every culture to some extent acknowledges it. right? But we end up in a situation where we live together with all of these hoaries. In Hamlets, somehow they've all ended up in the same area as well, right? So there's no escape, there's no running away from anyone. Now, what I want everyone to do now is not think of yourself as a wife or a husband, but think of yourself as a nonhori. Think of yourself as a sister-in-law, as a mother-in-law, because it doesn't look like there are many mother-in-laws here, but you will be. It doesn't look like there are many father-in-laws here, but you will become father-in-laws. And trust me, your understanding and your perception of what is acceptable and unacceptable culturally changes as you kind of go up the ladder, because all of a sudden you think, you know what, if I don't take on the old school father-in-law kind of system, if I don't take that up, then I'm going to miss out. Yeah, because there's a whole lot that I'm going to miss out on. And every single one of these people, when things don't work out, right, we end up becoming part and parcel of abuse. And abuse has to be understood from the point of view of a daughter-in-law. So you've got to first put yourself in the shoe of, if you are already a daughter-in-law, you have to ask yourself, what is it that I don't like as a daughter-in-law? And then when you put yourself in the shoes of a sister-in-law, then you've got to ask yourself, well, what is it that I didn't like as a daughter-in-law that I contribute to as a sister-in-law? I think these are some very, very basic things that most of us can figure out. But when we're in that position, we forget. As a daughter-in-law, no daughter-in-law likes being called down, you know, kind of all sorts of hours of the day because the sister-in-law's walked in with her kids. Come on, you have to come down and make tea. No daughter-in-law likes it. But when that same daughter-in-law goes to visit her mum, right, she becomes the guest, and her sister-in-laws end up serving hand and foot, you know, coming down up. They might be in bed with their husbands. They might be up there spending some quality time with their children. They might be just having some me time. But they're coming down. Why? Because they have to serve somebody who is essentially extended family. Islamically, there is no role there for that daughter-in-law. Islamically, Islam is silent about this. Islam is silent about this. There is only one principle that might cover what a daughter-in-law should do at that time, and that is generosity and treatment of the guest. That's about it. That's about it. There are no obligations to the father-in-law and mother-in-law as far as a daughter-in-law is concerned. There are no obligations to the sister-in-law as far as daughter-in-law is concerned. Those obligations are simply based on universals, the universals of good treatment, the universals of generosity, the universals of hospitality, and so on and so forth, which is all good. And in 90% of cases, right, if you walk into your brother's house, right, your sister-in-law is going to be hospitable. Yeah, but when she lives in a house where there's already an extra 5-10 members of the family that she serves hand and foot, you need to be a little bit more conscientious when you walk in and expect her to come down and serve you tea. All right, because she's been doing it all day. She's been doing it all day. What messes everything up is expectation. There is no generosity when there is an expectation for generosity, right? Then that person isn't really being generous. In fact, they're probably not even going to be rewarded for it because they see it as a burden. They see it as a burden because generosity, hospitality, these things are a manifestation of a person's good character. But it isn't coming out of their good character because they're doing it under pressure. They're doing it because they feel they must do it. And we contribute to that in some capacity or other. Sister-in-law comes in, all of a sudden, as a daughter-in-law, she'd be up helping with the dishes, etc., etc. But now that she's come in as a sister-in-law, she'll sit back. It's her mum's house. It's her mum's house, right? But she'll sit back and, you know, there'll be her sister-in-law slaving away. You know, you're a brother-in-law. You're a brother-in-law in the same family dynamic. You're a brother-in-law. You live in the same house. Your sister-in-law's making you breakfast. That's just bizarre. Why is your sister-in-law making you breakfast? Why is your sister-in-law making you breakfast? Your mom goes, oh, Betty, you know, my son's just woken up. He's got to get to work in 20 minutes. Would you please make him breakfast? Why? Get up and make your own breakfast. Get up and make your own breakfast, for God's sake. You know, it's your sister-in-law. It's not even your sister. It's your brother's wife who already has duties. Islamically speaking, she has duties to her husband. And that's where it all stops. and everything else is her generosity. You're not giving her a chance to be generous. She's hating her generosity. All right, every single woman here, when you're a sister, as a daughter-in-law, think about it. There's very few of you who actually like it. There's very few of you who actually like it because it's pressurizing, and we have big families. You know, my family is 7 brothers and sisters, and we're all adults now. Most of us are married with children. Imagine if the daughter-in-laws of that family have to serve everybody else. That's a lot of people. We're talking about a daily influx of guests, and it's our parents' house, so everybody's going to want to come around. And if people have that mindset, oh, because I've got 2 sister-in-laws in the house, I don't have to do anything, then what do those sister-in-laws go through? So these are things that we have to really, really think about. And the reason why these things are happening is because we've taken aspects of Islam and then adopted them, all right? And then we've taken other aspects of Islam and completely neglected them. And there's this discrimination going on. You know, when it comes to fair treatment, yes, you understand fair treatment when it comes to your mum. Oh, you know, my sister-in-law, she sits at home all day, she sits in the room all day, doesn't come down, and my poor mum, you know, she has to come and do all the work and so on and so forth. But when it comes to your sister-in-law, that sense of fairness and justice goes out of the window. All of a sudden it changes, the whole thing changes. And it's because we've gone and adopted these ideas that don't exist in Islam. In Islam, what are the rights of the in-laws? If you look in the books of jurisprudence, you don't find anything. The books of jurisprudence are silent about it. Subcontinental scholars have created a narrative because they exist within that reality. And I thought, well, you know, a daughter-in-law should be generous, etc., to her in-laws and so on and so on. Well, you know, that generosity is all well and good, but they've forgotten about Tower Hamlets. They didn't think about Tower Hamlets. All right, because in Tower Hamlets, we're talking about tiny 3-bedroom, 4-bedroom houses. All right, and there's 2 brothers with their wives and children, and the parents, and younger brothers and sisters, and then there's these 2 daughter-in-laws who are slaving after everyone. They never thought about that. There's no room for generosity there. There's no room for kind. It's all duty, and it's all duty imposed upon them by something other than Islam, because Islam is silent about it. All right, and there's no fair treatment. You know, there's a lot of daughter-in-laws who work. They work. This already, if they choose to work, fair enough. And if they need to work, that is already a violation of the Islamic rights, because there's absolutely no obligation upon them to have to work to provide for themselves, because that is supposed to be the responsibility of the husband. And if the household needs £30,000 in order for it to run, then he has to find that money. Islam doesn't take any prisoners when it comes to these roles and responsibilities, just like it doesn't take any prisoners when it comes to a wife's responsibilities to her husband. All right, but now she has to work. But given that she works, there's still no let up when it comes to her responsibilities as a daughter-in-law, responsibilities that Islam doesn't place upon her. So these are things that we really have to think about. How many times do I get a case where a sister messages me and says, you know what, my husband's great. He's a great guy. He's really, really nice to me. But there's nothing he can do about the suffering that I have to go through because of my in-laws. He can't do anything because it's his mum. And he can't say anything to her. He can't say anything to his mum. It's too difficult. He can't say anything to his brothers and sisters because they gang up on him. So you have this helpless husband who is supposed to be the qawwam. According to Islamic jurisprudence, he is the qawwam. So he is ultimately the one that is responsible. That is the person who Allah has given the authority to make sure that things are comfortable for his wife. But he can't apply the authority because all of a sudden people who are above him in the social ladder are basically overruling him. All right, so he can't give his wife the me time that she needs because his mum's taking all of it, because his sister's taking all of it, because his brothers are taking all of it. And this is all unfair. This is all unfair. Let me tell you something. If we simply adopted the Islamic value system, I don't think in our current situation quite a substantial amount will necessarily change. A lot of people live with their parents because they have to. A lot of people live with their parents because they have to. That's just it. It's one of the most poverty-stricken areas in the whole of Europe. So a lot of people have to. They can't afford another house in Tower Hamlets. They can't even afford a flat in Tower Hamlets. But if you now move away from this cultural narrative to an Islamic one, then you will remove expectation. You will remove the expectation. And that means that when a daughter-in-law does what she does, she will genuinely be doing it out of generosity, out of the good of her heart. And a sister-in-law, when she comes, she will be helping out. She will be helping out. Why? Because she sees it to be her duty, because it's her mum. Because the only parent, the only mother, or the only father, not in-laws, take the in-law bit out of it. The only father and the only mother that Allah talks about us being dutiful to is our own mother and our own father. That's it. The Quran does not mention the in-laws at all. If anything, if there is anything mentioned about it in Quran and Sunnah, then you can probably interpret it linguistically to actually mean stay away from the in-laws. Because the Prophet ﷺ spoke about, when he was asked about the hamu, which we generally understand to mean brother-in-law. But when he was asked about the hamu, and the word linguistically can be extended to a husband's relatives. That means father-in-law, the lot of them, right? All of the male relatives. The Prophet said, al-hamu al-maut, that the in-laws are death. You know, there could be lots and lots of underlying meanings behind that statement now that we are in this reality, you know, and now that we're having this conversation. Generally, yes, it's accepted that it's the brother-in-law that's mentioned, that's mentioned here, that one shouldn't be alone and become completely casual and informal with one's brother-in-law, because it can cause all sorts of problems in the family dynamic. So now, what do we need to do? Well, we need to simply think objectively about what is fair and what isn't. We need to think objectively about what is fair and what isn't. And we need to begin looking out for the one who is mazloom. We need to begin looking out for the one who is in that position of abuse. All right, we haven't got to, like, you know, the left hooks and the uppercuts and all of that stuff. No, we haven't even gone there yet. But this can lead to that, because what essentially it does in this particular dynamic is, it within the first 5 or 6 years, me and my friends who are also scholars of Islam, we often used to have this conversation, and we kind of did this little survey, and we said, you know what, we reckon that the daughter-in-law's patience lasts for about 6 years. It lasts for about 6 years, and then that's it. And then she eventually manages to move out, and then guess who gets it? The husband. It's time for revenge. All right, you know, now her kids are growing up and everything, he gets it. Oh, you know, you want a bit of action in bed tonight? No, thank you. I've got to make up for 6 years of me time. All right, and you know, all sorts of problems. Basically, within the first 5 or 6 years of what is essentially a beautiful marriage, to a couple who are compatible, you know, everything's there. The marriage dies. The marriage dies because they've never been able to work on it. They've never given each other any time. They've never been able to do anything for each other. They can't show affection for each other because the only space they have is the bedroom. All right. So they, you know, for lots and lots of couples, the idea of sitting and cuddling on the sofa doesn't exist, because they never spend any time together in the living room, and upstairs in the bedroom, there's no space. You know, there's just about enough space to put your sajjada down and pray. There's just about that much space. You know, when the baby comes along, sometimes the cot has to be in the mother-in-law's room. So we need to think about these dynamics and understand that these are difficult circumstances in which we have to look out for each other. We have to look out for each other, and we have to have some empathy. That means we've got to put ourselves in the position of the other person to then acknowledge what it is that I am meant to do. Okay? Because we've got this interesting melting pot of different cultures where, on the one hand, we've got these problems, this cultural kind of subcontinental baggage, and at the same time, we're interacting with Western culture and are becoming less and less resistant to things like divorce and so forth. So all of a sudden, we're working towards a situation where we still go through the struggle of the first 6 years, and then eventually when we move out and the relationship has never really had time to blossom, when it doesn't blossom, our resistance to divorce has also been broken down because of our interaction with Western culture. And therefore you end up with lots and lots of marriages eventually, when they move out and things are supposed to work out, breaking up. They begin to break up because finally they've had time to come together and they've realized that everything they have in common, everything that should have brought them together and had built love, etc. towards them has died in the last 5 or 6 years, and it's almost irreparable because it's just been too long. And that's a serious risk we have to look out for each other. And here I'm going to conclude with the role of the husband. You are the qawwam. As a husband, you are the qawwam of your wife. That doesn't mean authority, do this, do that, make me a cup of tea. It means you are responsible for the comfort of your wife. And that also means that if she is being abused by your mum, if she's being pushed too hard by your mum, and you're unable to provide a home for her, because Islamically you are obliged to. You're obliged to provide a separate home for her, and you have been unable to, then you are already in a weak position. That means you have to figure out a way of making it up to your wife straight away from day one. From day one, you're in a position where, you know what, my wife is already making this compromise. I've got to make up for it. So the romance has to multiply. The good treatment has to multiply. The gifts have to multiply. The words of, you know, the counseling has to multiply. The massages have to multiply. Right? Seriously, you've got to make up. You've got to make up for everything that she is going through that Allah hasn't made obligatory upon her. Allah hasn't. She's doing it. Why? She's just doing it for you. That's it. She is just doing it for you. You know, it's disgusting when husbands complain to me about, you know, my daughter-in-law doesn't do enough for my mum. What kind of complaint? My wife doesn't do enough for my mum. What kind of complaint is that? She's not meant to do any of it anyway. Whatever she's doing is out of her generosity. Why are you complaining? You have to serve your mum. If you don't have any sisters, you're alone, mate. Tough luck. Tough luck. You've got to do it. And now if your wife helps you out, oh, my poor husband, he's doing the dishes, let me go and help out. You give her a nice big thank you and a massage later on. Seriously, we have to change the way we think, right? You know, one of the only incidences, right, of this whole dynamic, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, what do we hear about him? He's leaving his home to go and look after his parents. He's not sending his wife. He doesn't send his wife to do it. So if we can think right, then you'll find that everything else will balance out, because the expectation will go. And now when a woman is generous towards her father-in-law or mother-in-law out of love for her husband, or because they're elderly and so on and so forth, you'll begin to appreciate it because you didn't expect it. Because you didn't expect it. And then when the husband compensates, the wife will appreciate that. The wife will appreciate that. And the whole dynamic changes. And there's a lot to be said in the context of marriage, outside of the context of abuse, that can't be said here. I hope that I have partly addressed the issue. Thank you for listening. Jazakumullah khairan. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.